Hi everyone, this is Arad from English for Everyone. And today in this video I'm going to answer the question asked by three of my students, Mahdi, Mohammed and Pejman, from different parts of the world. They just in 2 days asked the same question. What is the difference between would rather and prefer? Would rather and prefer. These are the words that we use to talk about our preferences. Okay, when we prefer something to something else, we say I'd rather, or I prefer, or I would prefer. So I'm going to talk about would rather, prefer, and would prefer. And as you know, if I have it after I, let's say, like this, I say I'd rather, and this is the short form of I would rather, or I would say I'd prefer, which is I would prefer. So that is clear. Okay, now what is the difference between the two? Well, first thing, let's say, I can't say that, I'm not saying that these are, and one is right or the other one is not, or something like this, but would rather is more common between the native speakers. Okay, so prefer is also used, but not as that much. Okay, so that's one. That's one of the differences. But that's the less important one. Okay, because whatever you use, whichever you use, is okay, is understood. Okay. And the other one is the formation. So I'm going to make a sentence, the same sentence, once with would rather, the other time with prefer. Let's see the changes. The one with would rather is I'd rather go home. Okay, I've got two options. I can go home, I can stay with friends, and let's say continue the party, whatever. I don't know. This is my preference, and that is go home. Okay, I say I'd rather go home. If I like to use prefer in this case, I say I prefer to go home. Okay, so that's the thing. This is the difference between the two when we make sentences. Rather, and then the base form of the verb. We can't have two on that side, ing on this side, or s or ed or nothing. We can't have anything. Can't have anything on the verb. Okay, so just base form of the verb. I'd rather go. But with prefer, we use to than the infinitive. Okay, to infinitive is used. So I say I prefer to say, I prefer to go, I prefer to be, I prefer to study, I prefer to stay, whatever. I just have to have to after prefer. Okay, if I'm just going to talk about the verb. Of course, I've got some other forms for prefer, but rather go. So that is the difference. Now when we change these sentences to negative, we need to be careful that these are like, actually this is also to go, but rather doesn't let to appear in the sentence. Okay, so this is the verb, and here this is the verb, and over here I've got the infinitive. Okay, this is not the verb. Okay, this is not the verb, this is not the verb either. So when that's an infinitive, we do not change it to negative by don't or didn't or doesn't or something like that. Just not is enough. Lots of students make mistake and say I prefer don't go. No. If I say don't go, I am ordering someone to stop doing something. One is going, I'm asking them not to do that. And I tell them, don't go. Means stop, stay. And that is completely different from what we want to say. Okay, so we just need not don't. That's another point. Okay, bear in mind. So I'd rather not go home. I prefer not to go home. Okay, so not after the verb. I'd rather not, I prefer not. That's another thing, and we do not have the short form. We do not say I preference. No, we do not say. Okay, so bear in mind. Just store them somewhere in your mind, make some sentences, and these are the things we need to know about the usage of these two. Okay? Now, the negative sentences that I already have over here are: I'd rather not stay here. I prefer not to stay here. Okay? So that's again the same thing. Not before the verb, not before the infinitive. And not before the base form of the verb, after rather, not before the to infinitive, after prefer. Okay, that is actually what I prefer not to do. Okay, now let's move on to the other side of the word. And over here, wrote other forms that we can have after prefer. After prefer, after would rather, we use the base form of the verb. But after prefer, we can have to verb, which is to infinitive. I prefer to drink tea. I prefer to drive home. I prefer to walk tonight. Something like this. I prefer to. Okay, I prefer to, then the verb, which is, the combination is the to infinitive. Okay, or I can talk about the option. I've got two options, tea and coffee, and I say I prefer tea. Okay, so you can have the name after that, the noun. Okay, so I prefer tea. Well, we would not say I would rather tea. No, that's not what we'd say. So I prefer to drink. I prefer tea. Or I can have the gerund form. Okay, this is not the continuous form. Do not mix it up with the continuous form. Continuous form always contains a form of verb to be. Okay, so this is not continuous. This is another form, another noun, just like tea. Okay, but the noun made from a verb. Okay, by adding ing, we change the verb into a noun. Okay, so I prefer to drink, I prefer tea, or I prefer drinking tea. They are all forms of a noun. They are not verbs. So we can have forms other than verb after prefer in these cases, in these forms. Okay, I prefer to drive, I prefer cars, I prefer driving. Okay, so you can have these forms after prefer. And over here I brought another one, and that is to compare. I prefer tea, I'd prefer tea. What is the difference? If I say I prefer tea, is that different from the time I say I'd prefer tea? Are they different? If they are, how? Well, they are different. That's why I brought them over here. I prefer tea is different from I'd prefer tea. When I say I prefer tea, it means generally. Okay, most of the times, this is my preference. This is what it is like. Let's say always. Okay, but when I say I'd prefer or I would prefer tea, means my general preference is not tea. But this time, that's okay. This time I want tea. This time I like tea. This time I'm going for tea. Okay, so this is to talk about something generally. And this one is to talk about a specific one, okay, not general. Okay, I prefer tea, I prefer tea. Okay, they are different. Now, back to this side.